The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. The Prime Minister heralded it as a landmark deal. That was between the UK and the EU. Businesses this morning, though, calling it an agreement that needs to keep being negotiated. We'll talk about an overhaul of UKEU emissions that may well save the UK £800 million. We'll be speaking to a French energy giant. Plus, the FTSE 100 sees a post-Brexit deal bounce. Very good morning. Welcome to Business Live on this Tuesday with me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, before we get into dissecting that UK-EU trade deal and what businesses have to think about it, let's bring in our city editor, Mark Kleiman, who's got some breaking news. And Mark, this regards the future of Liberty Steel.
Yeah, that's right, Darren. This is Britain's third biggest steel producer. And of course, the steel industry been at the forefront of the headlines in recent months after the government intervened to salvage the future of British Steel, the Chinese-owned company which operates that large steelworks in Scunthorpe. But what I understand today is that the steel tycoon Sanjeev Gupta, whose sprawling metals empire includes Liberty Steel, is seeking to have a winding up petition against Speciality Steels UK. That's the most important part of his UK operations. He's seeking to have a winding up petition which is scheduled to be heard tomorrow, adjourned. Now, if that adjournment is not granted by a court and the petition is approved, then it will lead to the compulsory liquidation of Liberty Steel's Speciality Steels UK operation. That employs nearly 1,500 people and it's a critical supplier to industries such as aerospace and defence. Now, the background here is that Mr. Gupta has been trying to restructure his Liberty Steel empire in recent months. It's been a protracted affair. Last week, he abandoned a court-led process to restructure the operations, and as a result of that, he's been scrambling for an alternative solution. My understanding is that in recent days, he's approached the government to see if it would use the legislation it enacted to salvage British Steel's future to give some support to Liberty Steel. That approach has been rejected by the government. So there is an increasing likelihood that Britain's third largest steel producer could collapse into compulsory liquidation as soon as tomorrow. Liberty Steel told me earlier today that discussions continue with creditors. Liberty understands the concern this will create for Speciality Steel UK colleagues and remains committed to doing all it can to maintain the Speciality Steel UK business. The government has also issued a statement saying that it's monitoring the situation there, but we will find out probably within the next 24 hours, Darren, whether Liberty Steel's speciality arm in the UK is facing the prospect of imminent collapse.
OK, Mark, great stuff as always on that breaking news. Mark Kleiman there for us. Thank you. Now, the Prime Minister has heralded yesterday's UK-EU agreement as a landmark deal, a deal that he says will reset relations under his government between Brussels and London. However, many details still are unresolved and unclear, and the ultimate outcome of the summit in London yesterday, according to business, has amounted to an agreement to keep negotiating. Well, let's speak to Anna Boita, who is Global Head of Economic Research at Allianz Trade, who this morning have also released their latest Trade Global survey. And we'll get on to that in a second if we can. And I suppose my first question, though, is the Prime Minister claims this is a win-win deal for the UK and the EU. What do you think?
Well, I think this deal comes at a time where exports of the UK never recovered to pre-pandemic levels, and the trade deficit of the UK reached a very high level of 8% of GDP. So clearly the UK has lost a lot of competitiveness when it comes to its non-tariff barriers with the EU, right, estimated at 10%. So already this deal is going to reduce those tariffs massively, right, 10% of tariff equivalent, that's massive. This is what the US US will have against the whole world at the end of this year, after our estimates. So clearly that's a big hurdle. And also the sterling appreciation, right? And that's difficult to counter, right? Because we can say that the export competitiveness lost 6% cumulatively since 2023, just because of the appreciation of the sterling against major trade partners. So we do believe that that's a win for the UK, definitely, but that's also a win for the EU. And I think it's very important to also look into that side. Why? Because we are in a context where defense spending is gaining much more traction. And we know a lot of the governments in the EU will spend on defense, including the UK, of course. But we also know we don't have the production capacity within the EU. So the UK joining a strategic partnership, whereas out of the top 5 Western European companies, 2 are located in the UK, it clearly brings the European 50% procurement rule more up to the reality. Because let's not forget, until now, so since the start of the war in Ukraine, we managed just to purchase 22% of our military products within the EU, but the rule is like 50. And we do estimate that bringing the UK back to the table would bring this share to 30%. So we will still be below this 50 desired or theoretical procurement intra-European rule, but clearly that's a game changer, and it's only the beginning, right? It's only the beginning, and we see that we are in this deal type of making a period.
Indeed, and as you say, even the government seems to be suggesting, this is a first step. I'm looking at your survey this morning saying that UK optimism when it comes to trade has been hard hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. How does that square with what our Chancellor Rachel Reeves said yesterday? She said the UK was now better placed on trade than any other country in the world. Is she wrong about that?
Well, it's true that pessimism is high, right? So you need to bring some optimism to the table, otherwise volumes will never recover. But I would say that after the deal with the US, with Europe, there is more hope for more optimism, right? We did the 2025 Allianz Trade Global Survey before and after Liberation Day. We didn't manage to survey just after the deal. So we can imagine that the share of those companies in the UK, 42% that were expecting turnover on export markets to fall by up to 10%, to be slightly reduced. So we do believe that there's hope in signing deals. Now, the deals are not perfect, and this is why it takes so much time to bring a more perfect deal on the table. I mean, the deal with the US has been done as an emergency type of deal, but it only reduces the tariff by 3 percentage points. We are still at 6% on average, and we were below 1. So in terms of, export potential, we still have a reduced number of around 3 billion sterling compared to the pre-Trump administration. So we are still not back to the starting point. So it still requires some work.
Okay, Anna Botta there from Allianz. Thank you very much indeed, live for us in Paris this morning. Thank you. Now, numerous sectors have welcomed the agreement, including voices from agri-food, retail and hospitality, and even telecoms. But what about the manufacturing sector? Delighted to say, join us now is Lord Harington, who's of course a Minister for Business and Industry, now the chair of Make UK and also the chair of the UK's Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum, and joined us now from that forum, which is in Leeds. Lord Harington, very good morning to you. First of all, your take on yesterday's deal. It should be noted, of course, you were a minister in the previous Conservative government, but in your new role, what's your assessment?
Well, yes, I do have form in the last Conservative government, since I had to resign to vote for precisely the sort of compromise that most of us would welcome today. So I was kicked out by Boris. So yes, I do have form, and it might come as no surprise to say that I fully support, and I think Keir Starmer did very well, and I think he deserves credit. Our biggest market's the European Union. Anything we can do to get closer trading arrangements is hugely beneficial to the economy. But of course, in all these arrangements, there are some things that they're not good for us, and there's some things that are really well. And it's for prime ministers and leadership to work out on balance which is better. And I think this certainly is.
And we talked about, didn't we, there's clearly some wins, and not least of all for the food sector. with greater access to the European market. What about manufacturers themselves, aside from the food sector? I mean, there is a sense, I'm sure, lots of manufacturers would want to rejoin the customs union, for example.
Oh, I'm sure.
But
I'm
that's
sure
not
they
going
all
to happen,
would.
is it?
Well, probably not called a customs union, although I do hope in future that will come. But to me, anything incrementally towards a frictionless trading arrangement where people can export to Birmingham in the same way they can to Berlin or to Paris, the same as Glasgow, which is exactly what we had and which our industry benefited hugely from. Anything moving towards that, I think, is a very good improvement.
And Lord Harington, what is the health of the manufacturing sector in Britain at the moment? I mean, we've just been talking about two key issues, tariffs and the uncertainty around trade. Combine that with sterling, which has strengthened quite a lot, actually, in the last year or so. I mean, those are two obstacles to exporters, aren't they?
They are. The real obstacles or the problems facing manufacturing industry are high energy prices, which are 50% more than our competitors in Europe. Secondly, skills, with a big skill shortage, despite the fact trained welders can earn £80,000 a year. There's a shortage of people wanting to do training for it. And thirdly, access to capital. Having said all that, a good period of political stability is very important. Political stability leads to investors making decisions. And I think the shocks from the tariffs will always be there. I think they're affecting trade all over the world. But I think that the arrangements that were made in the arrangements with the United States have gone some way for our members in steel and motor manufacturing to breathe a sigh of relief.
OK, and just very finally, Lord Harington, with your kind of vaguely political hat on, because it's important, isn't it, the response of political parties. What are you made of the Conservatives' Kemi Badenoch's response yesterday, saying that she would essentially tear this deal up?
I think she's on the wrong side of this argument. I think most people would accept that the deal's not perfect, the American deal's not perfect, the Indian deal's not perfect, but all of them are a movement towards more free and open trade. And I happen to think that on this particular thing, the Conservative Party is on the wrong side of this argument. And I'm afraid it looks to me like opposition for opposition's sake.
OK, Lord Harington, live for us there in Leeds this morning. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Now, big names such as BAE Systems, Vodafone and Ryanair have welcomed the deal. But what about small businesses? Tina McKenzie is the policy chair at the Federation of Small Businesses and joins me now. Tina, very good morning to you. Very simple question. What did you make of it?
We were really pleased to see this agreement and the general reset in the relationship between the UK and the EU, and I happened to be at the reception yesterday afternoon in Downing Street, and you could definitely feel a very different relationship between the EU diplomats and our own. So that's nice to see, because it's only with good relationships they can actually build really good deals. So it's more like I see this as heads of terms, where they've agreed the direction they're going in, and they've put it into three different, let's call them buckets. But for us, the SPS, which is really about getting food, animals, pets, things like that, plants, allowing that to move more freely between us and the EU. The EU for SMEs in this country is the single largest trading partner. And so that's really important that we get it right. And this is the start of getting it right for us.
And just in terms of we can all look back and the deal is there and, obviously businesses dissecting it. What would you know, what do you think small businesses want to see next? Because the government have made it clear that this is effectively the first step. I mean, negotiations will continue.
So what we need to do is the deal that's there now with SPS and getting those goods from the UK into the EU, we've got to quickly move on it. There's an absolute burden, cost, time, bureaucracy for small businesses. Then we've got to help them and encourage them. For the ones that stopped trading with the EU, we've got to encourage them to start again and to really reassure them that it's going to be easier than it was. A lot of people were getting their goods to the ports, then their goods were rejected, and then they were losing a lot of money in their businesses. So they stopped. best. So in order to get our economy growing, get productivity up, get the jobs up, get pay up, get profits up, then we've got to really encourage them to export and make it easier for them. I'm in the Department of Business and Trade today, and they're really talking about how do we really help them export more. And the EU, I said, is the single biggest market that we have. We trade 5 times the amount with the EU than the US. But the US was also very important as our single biggest one-country market. And then we have the India deal, and that is the fastest growing market in the world. So for us to move on the 3 of them in 2 weeks is really positive, and we've got to encourage the government to continue putting the work in and to continue moving it forward, because really, we can't just trade internally. For businesses to do well, we've got to trade externally, and we've got to encourage our small businesses to export, because that's how they'll grow.
Okay, Tina, thank you very much indeed. Tina McKenzie there from the Federation of Small Businesses. Thank you. And don't forget, you can get the latest on the reaction to that deal yesterday, and indeed the rest of the money news, including how Greg's is having a pretty good time at the moment on our money blog. All you need to do is scan the QR code that's on your screen right now to access that on the Sky News app. Now, as part of yesterday's agreement, the UK and the EU have pledged to link the carbon markets to avoid trade levies and reset post-Brexit relations. UK Steel said the move would be a significant step in reducing trade frictions in steel with the EU. Well, Schneider Electric is a French company. It's worth €126 billion manufacturing and energy firm. And delighted to say that Gwyn Aves is the Executive Vice President of European Operations and joins us now. Very good morning to you. Just first of all, can you explain to viewers what this carbon market is? Because I'm sure lots of them are unaware, and what you think of yesterday's deal.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. Yeah, just 2 things to comment. Very important achievement. On one side, it's about the emission trading scheme. It's about the carbon market. There is a carbon market in Europe. And the question was about to relink the UK and the European market together to have one way to look at carbon at the same time. So that's positive. But in addition to that, there was discussion in order to have the UK participating to the European Union internal energy market, electricity market in particular. And this is quite important because with the situation that we're facing today, with more insecurity or things like that related to energy, we need to come together and to have it stronger, at the energy market and carbon market. Why is that? Because that energy has been quite an issue recently, economic issue and weaponized. So we need to come stronger together. And this is a strategic asset. It's a strategic asset for UK. It's a strategic asset for Europe. So basically, that's the 2 kinds of discussion that we're having yesterday during the summit. Carbon on one side and internal energy market, electricity market in particular, to have it stronger together.
And this matters, doesn't it? Not least of all because we just heard there from manufacturers saying that one of the big issues here in the UK is the cost of our energy. Is this, in essence, good for the UK because Europe is it's a much bigger market, let's be frank about that, and the UK being able to plug into that bigger market makes it easier and will save us money?
You're absolutely right. You're raising the right question. There were some assessment of what it would, as a consequence, have to link the 2 markets. And in reality, Baringa estimates that it would save 44 billion a year by having this connection, mostly from less wasted renewable energy. So this is positive for both renewable projects, because today some of the projects are curtailed, meaning slowed down because of some time of the year. And it's a very good thing for consumers because it means cheaper electricity prices. So that's why the call to action is to accelerate this combination, this UK participation into the EU internal electricity market. This is big saving at the end.
And just very finally on this, I mean, is this now the end of the road when it comes to effectively this agreement, or there is the possibility to go even further?
Well, it's the starting point of the discussion. So right now, the trading arrangement that are currently applicable remains. So that's why I was saying we need to accelerate the discussion. We need to talk about the electricity markets, the state aid, the renewable, the environmental protection. So numbers of different elements that will be required in order to fulfill, this demand to integrate UK into the electricity market in Europe. So more to come, but the foundation of the discussion is super positive, and I think it will create a lot of appetite for the industry in UK by knowing that this is going to come, because in terms of investment decision, you need a price signal, and the price signal that we're seeing by having this connection will be only more competitive than it is today. So positive signal for the industry, that's exactly what we need in the UK, but for the rest of Europe too.
Okay, really appreciate your time this morning. It's quite a detailed but yet important area, these carbon taxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to bring you up to date with some breaking news in the last couple of minutes, and that is that the first person in Britain to be convicted for involvement in smuggling migrants across the Mediterranean has been sentenced to 25 years in prison. Egyptian Ahmed Ramadan Mohammed Ibid essentially helped facilitate illegal migration by providing boats, crews and technical advice to gangs smuggling people from North Africa to Italy. This body cam footage shows the moment Ibid was arrested. He's said to have played a vital role from his home in West London in the operation, which made apparently at least £12 million. Well, Ashna Harinag has all the details on this significant case.
Is that the only phone? No? Is that the only phone?
Within weeks of coming over to the UK on a small boat, Ahmed Ibid was organising for others to do the same. Originally from Egypt, he crossed the channel with his wife and daughter in October 2022.
He said he'll be fully compliant.
All the while, the 42-year-old was arranging crossings like these in the Mediterranean. He was the leader of an organised network that stretched from Libya to Ibid's taxpayer-funded home in West London. The National Crime Agency bugged the property after a tip-off from the Italian authorities. It was from here he masterminded a £12 million operation.
He transported approximately 3,800 migrants. We believe they each paid approximately £3,200 to cross in his boat. When the vessels got to a certain point in the journey, they called the Italian lifeguard and were rescued. In the first crossing that we became aware of, there were actually 2 fatalities when the lifeguard rescued the boat.
Ibid was a former fisherman turned virtual skipper who called himself the captain. These images found on his phone show the scale of his exploitation of vulnerable people for profit.
He had no regard for the safety of the individuals who were being transported, and in fact were viewing them essentially as human cargo. There are specific incidents in which he discussed with associates that each person would need to give up his or her mobile phone, and that in fact, if anyone was caught with a phone, that person would be tossed overboard.
Ibid is the first person in Britain to be convicted of smuggling people across the Mediterranean. He said he was making a living, but it came at the cost of others risking death. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
There you go. That is just a reminder of that breaking news in the last couple of minutes. That is Ahmed Ramadan Mohammed Ibid has been sentenced to 25 years at Suffolk Crown Court for facilitating illegal immigration, a groundbreaking court case for providing boat crews and technical advice to gangs smuggling people from North Africa to Italy. And we'll have the very latest from Suffolk Crown Court at the top of the hour here on Sky News. OK, let's bring you up to date with the markets now. Let's bring in Lindsay James, from Quilter Investors, who joined us. Lindsay, very good morning to you. Just first of all, let's talk about that deal yesterday, because it's provided the FTSE with a bit of a bounce.
Yeah, that's right. I think markets have been generally encouraged that we've had 3 deals now in 3 weeks for the UK. following on from the arrangements with India and the US. The investors have been hoping, I think, for maybe something a little broader with the EU, but nevertheless, it's a good starting point, cutting red tape, particularly for our food sector, and also giving our defence industry a bigger market to sell into as well. Although the wording around it is very much moving towards and taking steps to bring these two economies closer together. But we're going to have to see something a little bit more concrete, I think, before we see greater share price reactions.
Lindsay, I am fascinated this morning by what the Chancellor said yesterday, but essentially the UK, after a series of deals, with India, the US, the EU now is in a good place. What is the city making of that? I mean, certainly sterling, for example, is doing quite well at the moment.
Yes, that's right. I think we have to take all this with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Of course, when we talk about improving GDP growth in the UK, we're generally talking about still a growth rate that's under 1%. Although the signs have started to emerge that the UK economy is maybe doing a little bit better than it was the first part of the year, I think we do need to kind of keep our expectations in check a little bit. But, still positive signs emerging that we're starting to see these deals actually happening. But I do think we need to see something a little bit bigger to get the UK economy out of its sort of malaise at around 0.5% growth.
I'm also reading today that the chief economist of the Bank of England is concerned about how quickly interest rates are being cut. Still continued concern, clearly, in the central bank about inflation.
Yes, that's right. We knew there were dissenting voices at the last meeting, and this is really fleshing out the reasons behind that. So this is Hugh Pill, who's really explaining, and this is an important voice on the MPC. He's listened to, and the media obviously follow his views very closely as an economist. And he's highlighting that the disinflationary process, that's the speed at which inflation rates start to come down, that process is really hitting a few roadblocks. We've seen wage inflation, for example, continuing to stay above 5%. We've also seen core services inflation being pretty sticky. But he also points to some positive factors. He's also saying that actually business surveys are looking pretty good at the moment. So that's another reason why inflation might just stay a little bit higher than many were expecting. So he's just calling for a bit of a pause. Now, the market's not expecting much in the way of rate cuts, around 50% chance of a cut in July. It doesn't price in the next quarter point rate cut fully until September. So I think really investors are respecting what he said and not expecting much in the way of cuts in the near term.
And just very briefly, Lindsay, Greggs doing quite well at the moment. Looking at the strongest ever year, it's a high street chain that goes from strength to strength.
Absolutely, yep. They had a trading statement out this morning. It showed a slight acceleration in the growth rate, like sales up 2.9%, so much better than the 1.7% they reported for the first 9 weeks of the year. Now, a lot of that comes from price, though, so I think the question is this going to be sustainable? But lots of innovation, pizzas, iced teas, macaroni cheese, they're all reasons why the business is still much loved by the British public, and the shares are doing well today, up just over 7%.
And, of course, those famous sausage rolls as well. Lindsay, appreciate your time this morning. Lindsay James there from Quilter Investors. Thank you. OK, that is it from me for the moment. Of course, we're back with the afternoon edition of Business Live at 4:30 this afternoon. Do join me then if you can. Up next, though, it is Kamali with the rest of the day's news at midday here on Sky News. I will see you a little later.